Another player I want to briefly touch on before we let you go, Toby, is Antony at Betis. Now, everyone knows who Antony is. Everyone kind of knows what he's been up to over the course of his career. Some people watching this and listening to the show may have seen he left for Betis and forgot all about him. Especially if you're a Manchester United fan, you'd be forgiven for trying to focus on other things. But he had quite a significant market value upgrade, Toby, didn't he? Because he went from 30 to 40 million euros. And this is the first time in his career since he left Ajax that his market value is now back above where it was when he was at Ajax, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was 35 million euros. And I guess that just goes to show, Toby, the remarkable turnaround he's had in Spain.
Yeah, he really had a turnaround. Like, as you said, the Man United fans made a mockery out of him. He wasn't taken serious in England, and then he came to Spain, to Betis, and it was a love story from the first day. And now he's going back and back to his best performances, or maybe or back to his Ajax performances, more or less. So he's on the way up. He rose again. And yeah, that's also a good case that you can also lose a lot of market value, but you can also regain it when you have the good performances or make a good career choice. And I think this choice to go to Betis was perfect for him. La Liga suits him, and now he developed into one of the best players of the league when you take out the big three, the Atletico, Real, and Barcelona players. Yeah, it's kind of remarkable that he's come back to where he is now. So that's a very good choice, his move to Betis.
Yeah, Manu, we could probably spend the whole day talking about players who've been chewed up by the Premier League. They go somewhere else and they finally begin to kind of show their true colours because they're given space and time to show what they're capable of, especially technically gifted players like Antony. Now, I think he had to contend with that physicality, which he hadn't really come to terms with at any point of his career before that. But he was also had the double whammy of being signed as, Eric Ten Hag's kind of favoured son, his chosen player. And when things didn't work out at Manchester United, a lot of the blame was thrown at Antony. But he's now moved to Betis. He's basically wiped the slate clean and he started from scratch. And as you wrote in the La Liga text, La Liga article, he's looking back to his very best, isn't he?
Yeah, it's his highest market value since August 2023. It's such an interesting case study of maybe don't jump into a certain situation right away. Looking back at how he played at Ajax, the style of football that Ajax played, granted with Erik ten Hag, that made him a really good player, was always going to be, I think, a struggle in the Premier League. We've seen this with other players too. Jadon Sancho comes to mind, who did really well in the Bundesliga, but the style of football in the Premier League is so very different than it is in other leagues. We can argue all day whether that's better or worse, but it is that is a fact. Not every type of player will be able to transition to that style of play. And I think Antony is a really good example of, hey, maybe going to Spain is actually a better idea for you, right? Because it's still a top 5 league. The football is very different. There is more emphasis on other things in terms of how you play your style of football. In fact, an argument can be made. That's why Jude Bellingham decided to go to Spain rather than the Premier League, because he was a player that was already having some physical struggles with injuries, etc. And, he himself decided that maybe Spain was actually a better option. That's career planning. Antony, I don't know if that was really the case here. And I think the other thing, and this is something that we often have to remember too, he's 26 now. A player at 26 is a completely different entity than someone in the beginning of the 20s. They have now experience. They had to deal with certain things. They had to deal with changing landscape, right? Going from Brazil to the Netherlands and then to England and now going to Spain. That matures you. And I think it's just a really good example of maybe don't give up on a player quite right away. And maybe if you're a player, I understand why careers are short. You maybe only get the chance once in your lifetime, but I think it's a really good example of be really careful what you choose to do in your next step in your career. Because, yeah, well, Antony, it's actually now working out with Real Betis, isn't it? But there's many players where the next step is even worse and we don't see the market value recover. It's a great story for him. I think this football suits him really well. And I think there's probably going to be a good market for him if he chooses to have a market. I think that is really going to be an interesting question as well. Is he actually going to maybe stick it out there because it is such a good situation for him? But yeah, I think it's a great story. It's one of the really good stories of this market value update that, that a player who had a really rough time in the Premier League, playing at a club that was in a difficult situation at the time as well, has now recovered his career. And is looking like the star that he was at Ajax.
Yeah, I mean, before we wrap up, Toby, it was probably worth throwing that to you actually, because you obviously keep an eye on the market value trends across European football as a whole. And when you look at a player like Antony, who has bounced back, who's very quickly adapted to Betis tremendously well, do you think as a market value analyzer, okay, this guy is now put himself on a stage where he can then go on to an Atletico Madrid, a Valencia, or perhaps even a Real Madrid or Barcelona, if he can really kind of show that he's truly thriving in La Liga, or perhaps even, return to Brazilian football where there's a lot more money these days? Is that the next stage now for Antony and his market value if he can continue these performances?
I think he can get more upgrades if he maintain his performances right now. But I also think he will have a market in the summer. There will also be a World Cup. I think he has good chances to play there. And then also with his style of football, you can he can always create some special moments. And then we also saw in the history of World Cups, a special moment at the World Cup is really valuable on the market. So I guess he will have some opportunities. Also, there were also rumors with Atletico Madrid, for example, and maybe Simeone is also one coach he can get even more out of him. But I think Manuel also said this. Maybe it's also a fact that he should just, think for himself and think maybe Betis is such a good club for me and everything works well. So I don't think every player is made for having a move like every transfer window, and sometimes just the combination is that good that maybe you should just rest in this situation and just stay at your club. And I think Betis is also a good team and also a great club, always playing in Europe. Last year, Conference League finalist, and now in the Europa League. So I don't really think he needs to move. He can also be a great player in La Liga for Betis and for the Brazilian national team, for example, without moving the clubs in the summer.
Yeah, I suppose if he and Betis continue what they're doing, he could end up facing Manchester United, maybe in the Europa League next season. But definitely a player to keep an eye on going forward, because as Toby says, we don't know what could happen in the coming months, and maybe 4 or 5 months down the line, we're talking about Brazilian World Cup winner Antony fighting off bids from around European football, and it wouldn't have been the craziest thing that's ever happened in football